Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I'd like to thank you for taking some time to listen to me speak, and thank you, Simplilearn, for inviting me to speak to this audience today. I value the opportunity. So I'd like to share a few things with you just about myself by way of introduction first. I come from a long line of farmers. My father, my father's father, my mother, her father were all farmers. My family grew soybeans in the state of Kansas in the United States, back at a time when nobody in the United States even knew what a soybean was. Practically, it wasn't a big staple or food supply at that time. And even though I haven't exactly stayed precisely with that tradition, I have spent a lot of my time recently in the seeding, weeding, gardening, and growing of agile teams. A little more than 10 years of my recent time, and I have all of the scars to show it. A recent Scrum Master I trained said, as a Scrum Master, you often find yourself at the end of a smoking barrel. The other gun is held by management, and I appreciate his sentiment after having done this for many years. So as it says up here, I'm right now a principal consultant with ThoughtWorks. And also been with Scrum Alliance for quite a few years and doing a lot of training of Scrum Masters, product owners, this sort of thing, and a lot of coaching in the industry. And even though I've worked with anything from very, very small teams to very, very large teams distributed across many countries and many continents, many time zones, I've recently developed a particular expertise in bringing these lightweight governance ideas and execution and management techniques into very large enterprise, heavily regulated, heavily compliance-driven environments. And while that is just as difficult as it sounds, it is also very rewarding to help bring things like financial promise and national security and life-saving medical devices to millions and millions of people at faster paces with better results and better track records over time. So there are definitely many challenges working in those large realms, but I've found it very, very helpful. And though I may not be a farmer anymore, where my family was, I certainly study at the feet now of my wife of 24 years when it comes to matters of growing plants and creating beautiful landscapes. But I would like to hope that I can share some thoughts on growing self-organizing teams this afternoon that you might find valuable, and that's my hope. So let me give it a try. So first, I'd like to talk about the overall backdrop. An agile team and a self-organizing Scrum team does not exist by itself. It's part of an entire ecosystem. It can't survive just in a vacuum. So let's start at the lower left-hand corner here of this chart, which I basically lifted from a talk that Esther Derby gave many years ago. She's a co-founder of Scrum Alliance. We all act and behave in certain ways. We have certain behaviors. We show up at certain times at our jobs. We work at a certain level of dedication. We take so many tea breaks per day, and we leave at a certain time. And based on this behavior and these actions that we take, our organizations will put together structures and systems to try and mold that behavior into something useful and valuable to our customers and our consumers. And from those systems and structures, our employees and team members, they learn what do we really value and what do we really believe. When your first day you show up in your new job, they hand you that little placard that says, here's our values and here's our beliefs and this is what is important to us. And what do you do with that thing when you first get to your desk? You throw it in the bottom of the door and you don't look at it again until your last day at that company when you're digging it back out and packing your stuff to go to your next job, right? That's not where you learn what's important to a company. The place where you learn what's important to your organization is by observing who gets rewarded, who gets punished, who gets sent on a cruise to the Caribbean, and who gets taken out behind the woodshed and beaten with a stick. That's what really teaches you, what's important here. How do I thrive here? How do I get by here? And I very, very often see organizations, they say, well, if we could just get those darn people to act differently, then we'd be agile. Then it would be good around here. Then we'd be able to get something done. If we could just get those people to act right. When really you have to stand this entire proposition on its head to make any difference in your organizations. You have to say, if these are the things that we value and these are the things that we truly believe, then we will put together these alternate structures and systems that are not like the structures and systems we had before, and then everyone will start to behave differently. So we cannot expect to have the same metrics, the same measurements, the same kind of backdrop that we had before, and expect everyone to just automatically self-organize and come together and do the things that we'd like them to do. So that's one of the challenges that we have to overcome. In addition to the Scrum Master training and Product Owner training that I offer, I also often do executive leadership summits. And one of my main messages there is that you have to practice leadership on a cloudy day. And what I mean by that is the first time your Agile team exhibits some ownership and they take a decision on their own and it goes fantastically well, and you say, "Good job, that's what I want you to do," they forget that in 15 seconds. But the first time that they make a decision and take ownership over something and do it on their own, and it's an absolute steaming disaster, that's when they pay attention. That's the day when they learn what's really important to you and what's not important to you, and what kind of an organization are they really affiliated with. On that day, it is extremely important to tell the team, "Excellent, I'm glad you took ownership of that decision. That's what I want you to do. We need to work together to achieve better outcomes, but you're on the right path, and I want you to stay on this path," and give them encouragement. That's the day they'll remember what you really believe and what's really important to you. Do you come back that day and say, "Everybody has to work 80 hours and be here Saturday and Sunday and fix this terrible mess"? Or do you congratulate them for taking the decision? "Regrettably, it didn't work out the way we wanted to. Let's work towards better outcomes next time." That's the right type of messaging that we would like to see from leadership teams. And without that, we can't really expect the teams to change or do anything differently, or really begin to self-organize. So I'll frame this up in terms of Scrum a bit, because that's mostly my background, what I've been recently doing. I see a lot of new Scrum Masters that believe that their job is to control, that their job is to lead, and they step into a traditional leadership role and they assume authority on behalf of the team, and they presume that they're the ones who need to exhibit a strong traditional leadership role, when nothing could really be further from the truth. I see a common phenomenon where new either Agile project managers or Scrum Masters will step in, exert traditional leadership style, and then wonder, "Why is my team not self-organizing?" They're telling them, "Step left, step right, step left, step right," and then being upset that the team doesn't self-organize and doesn't mature and doesn't exhibit ownership over itself, even though they're being told in lockstep, what to do every step of the way. And those folks are well served to remember the old saying that responsibility is taken, not given. And as long as the Scrum Master continues to take responsibility for the team, then the team's not going to take responsibility for itself. So if leadership is not really that role, then what is it? They're not there to lead and to point the way to the team. They're really there much more to create the right environment, to make sure that all of the success indicators are there, to remove obstacles. You think of themselves as clearing the way, straightening the path ahead of a team out in front. They're kind of out in the jungle, clearing the path and removing the stones and chopping down the large trees, making sure the team has a smooth and easy path ahead of them. And in this way, these are much more of the functionality that role should take on. It's not about leading. It's not about telling the team exactly where to go and which direction to go. It's about making sure that they have the ability to go the direction that they would like to go, and encouraging them to do so. So it's pretty often that people forget the principle that an Agile leader needs to be a servant leader, that you need to be willing to step into the breach often and take the sticks and stones, from management or from senior leadership that are coming down, and make sure you create the conditions that the team needs to succeed. If you're the one who takes responsibility, if you're the one who takes accountability, if you're the one who exercises authority, you've just removed all of that from the team. You've just taken away their own sense of self-responsibility and their own sense of self-accountability, and removed their own sense of authority over themselves. There exists this very strong sort of a parent-child relationship between team members and project managers or even Scrum Masters in many cases, where that's not what we want. Our team members are in the habit of routinely running to mommy, daddy, project manager, running to mommy, daddy, Scrum Master, whenever there's a problem, and we just kind of hand out all the answers and say, no, it's okay, go this way, go this way, go this way. Another common thing that I say very often is the 4 most important words you can remember as a leader or a leadership position within an Agile adoption effort is, what do you think? Even when you know the answer, even when you know in your mind and you know in your heart of hearts what the direction is that they need to take, it's really important not to necessarily get in the habit of just giving out the answer every time. That you want to cultivate an attitude of problem solving, of encouraging them to utilize their own capabilities to come up with the correct answers and the correct path. Even when you know, like I said, in your heart of hearts what the right answer is, if you just start handing out the answers right and left every time they come running to mommy, daddy, leader, then they'll continue to come running to a mommy, daddy, leader, and they won't continue to grow, and they won't start to self-organize, and they'll continue to expect you to have responsibility, accountability, and authority, and they won't take those things for their own over their own destiny, so to speak. So there's a very old saying that if you can explain to me and tell me how you're going to measure me, that I will predict perfectly exactly how I'm going to behave. That if I know exactly by what metric I'll be measured, then I can predict exactly what I'm going to do. It's pretty often that we think that collecting more data is harmless, but we have to remember that by everything that we measure, we are also sending a value statement. Every time we take a metric or take a measurement or collect a sample of data, we are sending the message to all of the people in that environment, this is the thing that I value. This is the thing which is important to me. And at ThoughtWorks, about 80% of our business is hard delivery projects, and about 20 is coaching, consulting, training type stuff. When I'm in pure consulting mode, and I'm not exaggerating, I spend about 50% of my time identifying and talking people out of measuring things that actually provides incentive to bad behaviors or things that I don't want the teams to do because of unintended consequences, because of the unintended consequences of measurement. Everybody will try and game a metric in some way or another. Everybody wants the gold star, right? So we'll try and do what we can to look good in terms of whatever measurement is put out there. And when we do that, we end up behaving in ways that were not anticipated by the metrics. I've only come up with one that actually gets you to behave the way I would like you to when you're trying to game the metric in the first place. That's a slightly different story. So there's a couple of stories of unintended consequences I'd like to share briefly with you. You may have run into this first one if you've done much reading of any of the Scrum literature. And this was a story from Canon and their photocopier business when they noticed that their field repair times were taking much, much longer than the books said they should take. If a field tech would take 4 hours to do a repair when the book said it should take 1 hour. And they tried to optimize that. There was a very highly executively sponsored drive to get these two numbers into alignment, to get these things to come together. So they put together promotions, and they put together incentives, and they put together reward packages to get these numbers into perfect alignment. And regional managers and district managers and field techs were all rewarded for doing this. And in the time of about 6 months, they were wildly successful. The numbers came perfectly together, exactly as they should have. And their costs also exploded, went absolutely through the roof. And that gave them an opportunity to step back, scratch their heads, and think, wow, what just happened here? So when they did further analysis, they found out that their field techs were extremely, extremely knowledgeable about these machines. They knew them inside and out. So they would show up to a malfunctioning machine, pull out an assembly, break down the 4 or 5 sub-assemblies, get down to the one little roller bearing that was malfunctioning, and replace that one little tiny piece that was malfunctioning, reassemble the sub-assemblies, put the whole assembly back together, put it in, lock the machine up, and go away. The way the books were written were that you should show up, unlock the machine, chuck the entire assembly, put in a new one, lock the machine back together, and go. So that's what they started doing. And you can imagine the ramifications on their warehousing, on their logistics, on their fulfillment. The whole supply chain just bloated. The cost of all of that excess inventory and the excess shipping, not to mention the energy wasted, was much, much higher than the cost of those few extra hours on behalf of the field technicians. So they were attempting to optimize the wrong thing. And I think we're very often guilty of that in our organizations today. A similar story comes from this very, very fancy, very upscale neighborhood in Dade County in Florida. Not my part of the United States. But this is a very, very rich, very, very wealthy neighborhood where you routinely see, Ferraris, Jaguars, Maseratis driving around in the street. And the people that live in these multi-billion-dollar homes and drive these multi-million-dollar cars were very upset that the garbage trucks were still on the street after 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you're driving around in a Maserati convertible, you don't want to go behind a garbage truck either, probably. But I don't know from personal experience. But so they lobbied the city council, they lobbied the local, waste collection departments, and they, got everybody rallied. Hey, we got to fix this problem. This is terrible. This is terrible. And we also don't want them starting at midnight and interrupting our late night parties. So we don't want them on the streets in the afternoon either. So we've got to figure out a way to do this. So they put together similarly incentive package. They started to measure performance. They tried to incent the drivers and the teams to get their job done faster. They also were very successful. They got the collection done and got the garbage trucks off the street by 11 a.m. At the same time, the incidence of traffic accidents involving commuter vehicles and trash trucks went up 35%. So the same people driving around their Ferraris and Maseratis complaining about the trash trucks were now getting hit by the trash trucks as they ran stop signs, as they sped, as they cut corners, as they were hurrying, to get where they were supposed to go to meet the productivity goals that had been put out there for them. So just a couple of cautionary tales here about how we should be very, very careful what we measure. I encourage everyone, think once, think twice, think 3 times before you even assert that you want to collect a piece of data, that you want to collect a measurement, that you're going to gain something from this bit of information, because what you indeed gain from that might be far less valuable than what you lose or the type of behaviors that you're actually providing an incentive for. So be very cautious in determining what you're going to measure. So one example that comes very quickly and kind of clearly to my mind is the issue within Scrum of the daily burn down chart, which I've started referring to as the burnout chart, because of what a lot of inexperienced or green people will do with them. So every now and then you can use this kind of day-to-day analysis of time spent to preempt or find performance issues, find bottlenecks. There's really only one type of lesson you learn from this type of analysis, and it usually is that you're too single-threaded on one particular skill set within the team. But it does require that you ask the team members to essentially re-estimate how much work is remaining on every single task they're performing every single day. You're kind of like the little impatient kid in the back of a car saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And that's not the role that we're supposed to play either. We're not to be like the little dogs nipping at their heels or the angry kid in the back seat either. But just reading the literature and from introductory training, the notion of ideal developer days, ideal developer hours, this sort of thing can lead a lot of people new to this role to assume that my job is to micromanage. My job is to find out every single day exactly how many hours are left on every single task, so I can draw this chart in a nice, smooth fashion. But it actually has a very negative impact on team members, in my opinion. I don't believe that they then feel like their commitment is being honored. I don't feel like they feel respected. They don't feel trusted in this kind of an environment. And I think that we are much, much better served by asking ourselves, what are we delivering, as opposed to what is our overall activity? It's easy to get wound around the axle, so to speak, measuring activity. How much time was spent, how many hours were burnt, how long were they in the office? Were the cars in the parking lot at 6 a.m.? Were they still there at 6 p.m.? People look at all kinds of silly things when they're trying to optimize activity, when we really should be looking at delivery. I've taken to not even asking the question, how much time is left anymore? And I simply measure state transitions in my workflow as work moves, as requirements move through the overall system, and never ask anyone to re-estimate anything. And I find that I have teams that are maturing and growing and taking responsibility faster in that kind of an environment than they are when I'm very tightly managing and measuring and looking at every last little hour and every last little detail. So if we build an organization that tries to optimize itself on utilization, then we end up with teams that are very highly utilized, where everyone is busy, busy, busy all the time, and they may or may not ever deliver anything, but they're all really busy all the time and they work a lot of hours. If we put together our measurement and diagnostic taxonomies and regimes based on delivery rather than activity, then we build teams which deliver. They're not necessarily busy, busy, busy all the time, and they're not necessarily 100% utilized, but they get high-value track records of delivering real value to our customers on a very regular basis. So the tail end of my story here is that even though we really want leadership to exhibit leadership more on the cloudy days than on the sunny days, we've got to remember that when we prepare the ground successfully for change, when we send the right statements about the values that we have, and we change our own hearts and our own minds about the value of the team, and we send the message not just through the words that we say, but through the metrics that we collect, through the data that we analyze about what is important to us, that the thing important to us is that as a team that you grow, that you mature, that you take more responsibility for yourselves. It's not just do we get more widgets faster, it's do we get a team which is more capable of determining how to build the widgets faster and steer themselves in the right direction without a bunch of micromanagement. When we stop measuring the wrong things and we stop micromanaging and we stop distrusting, then the teams know that the thing we truly honestly value is their own growth and their own self-organization. And only at that time can we really expect them to grow and mature and take more responsibility and more authority over themselves. As long as we continue to measure the wrong things, we send the wrong messages, and then wonder, why are those darn people not acting right? Well, they're not acting right because we're giving them all the wrong messages very, very often. When we do that and stop the micromanagement, stop the distrusting, stop the over-analysis of the wrong things, then we can expect our teams to begin to come together, to grow up, and to start acting like adults and taking responsibility for the things that we want them to do, instead of continuing to just go lockstep and do what mommy, daddy, leader told them to do. That's everything that I had prepared today. Does anybody have any comments or any questions or any concerns about anything that I've mentioned in my talk this afternoon? Sure. What do we got here? Thank you for the microphone.
Hi, I'm Priya from Bosch.
Hey, nice to meet you.
I just have one question. When it comes
Sure.
to Agile and for building self-motivating teams,
Yeah.
does it also work with new college graduates, especially in a country like India where NCG could be as young as 22 years old?
Sure,
How do we build in this kind of self-organization, the sentiment of self-organization into such a young person?
Sure, that's an excellent question. And it does come up fairly often. It's a valid criticism of Scrum and Agile, I think, that it does require a certain level of seniority among the team members, that you cannot throw a bunch of bright-eyed freshers into a Scrum team and say, hey, self-organize, come up with an emergent architecture, come up with an emergent database architecture, do your best thing, right? And expect anything good to come of that. It absolutely will not. But by the same token, if you build a team out of wall-to-wall A-player rock stars, then mostly what they're going to do is sit around and have theoretical arguments with each other all day, and they also will not deliver anything. So the important thing really when constructing teams is that you build them organically, that you have a couple of senior people that can exhibit a little bit of leadership and show the way, a couple of mid-level kind of laymen who know their way around but are not necessarily senior, and each of them will lead by example and demonstrate to the new team members step into those roles and how they go about it. The first time that I was asked to come and work at a global development center of a client of ours, it was in Mumbai, and we had been talking to them about how do you practice continuous integration, how do you do the extreme programming techniques, all of this sort of thing, and talking on the phone, and the message was not getting through. We sent several of our Indian team members over here, and they had a very difficult time. They couldn't get through building security. They had their computers taken away from them. They put one guy in literally in a broom closet in the front of the place and said, well, the way you can coach the team is we'll send them out to talk to you one at a time, and you can just sit there. So I ended up coming for a month, literally just to be the guy from the West, the important guy. When I showed up, the security doors were open, the laptops came back, and we got access to the teams, and it was yes, sir, yes, sir. So I felt kind of silly having to do that, but it was what needed to be done. We went out of our way to set up situations in which some of my younger colleagues from ThoughtWorks in India would specifically overrule me and override me and say, no, Greg Smith, you were wrong about that, and here's why. But do it in a respectful way, do it in a reasonable way, and I would demonstrate how to respond to that and say, I see, I understand, thank you for pointing out my error to me. We went out of our way to create these little role plays that would demonstrate to them how to effectively push back on leadership when they're wrong, and how to, in a respectful manner, point out when there is an error. We often have to do that in an agile environment. We have to learn to say, begging the captain's pardon, sir, but did you want me to steer the ship directly onto the rocks? The big, terrible rocks that are going to rip out our hull and make us all drown? Just asking, I'm just asking, right? Even asking that question would get you labeled as a pessimist, as a non-team player, and that's where bravery comes back into the picture. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to a very short question, but build balanced teams is really the answer. You can't expect to throw a bunch of freshers in the team together and say, hey, self-organize, do your thing, and expect anything good to happen. You get a horrible, horrible mess if you get anything at all. And that's a valid criticism. You need a level of seniority to build healthy Scrum and Agile teams. Anyone else got anything on their minds over here?
Yeah. Gregory, what are the good attributes of a self-organizing team? Maybe 5 or 10 attributes that you think should be.
I think one of the highest ones that comes to mind for me is the lack of willingness to accept constraints. That when they see something wrong, they don't just accept, well, that's just the way it is. It just takes me 40 hours to get my password reset every time it goes wrong. It just takes me, 6.5 months to get access to a performance environment. That's just the way it is around here, and that's just the way it always was, and that's the way it always will be. They have to have a willingness to challenge those constraints and to raise up those issues. There are things that leadership has to lead with in an Agile adoption, but there are also things that the team has to lead with. There are things that they're close to the work, and they're the ones experiencing the sand in the gears and the grit in their face. They're the ones up against all these institutional headwinds, and we need them to be not just brave, I'll say brave enough for now, but hold that thought for a second, to be brave enough to raise the flags and tell us when there are big problems, when things are taking too long, when things are too institutionalized. And when I say brave, I don't mean that to say that they're not. And cowardly is too pejorative of a word, but anytime I see someone kind of behaving in sort of a cowardly way, the first thing I do is look around for the bullies and try and figure out who the bullies are. Otherwise, there wouldn't be these kind of cowardly behaviors, and I try and shut down the bullies. When I see teams unwilling to raise issues, unwilling to talk about problems, my first suspicion is that this is a team that's been pushed down and beat back for a long time, and they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to raise any issues. So I think that the number one thing that really comes to mind is a unwillingness to accept given constraints and a perfect willingness to challenge those constraints and say, look, we can do better than this. It's ridiculous that it takes this long to get these little things done. I think we're willing to accept a lot of impediments because we've learned that it's business as usual. It's just the way things go. And Agile teams, I think, really need to learn that they should not do that, that part of their job is to not necessarily, scream and holler and yell about things and not to be problematic about it, but to make sure they're creating visibility into the issues and make sure that they're giving management and leadership the insight they need as to what kind of issues they're facing on the ground. I think that's really it. And you have to cultivate that attitude. You have to demonstrate that it's okay for them to do that. You have to let them know that that's what you want, or they're not going to do it. You have to, when you see someone behaving it that way, you have to call them out and reward them for it, or others won't do it. That's a behavior that's all too uncommon, I think, in our organizations today. We don't cultivate that. We tell everyone, oh, self-organize, raise problems, tell us what's wrong, and then we push them down and kind of punish them when they do point out institutional issues that they're struggling with. So that's my number one that I would look for. Good. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Anuj from Bosch. I am also a certified Scrum Master, so I had some experience.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I had a real, I want to share one example with you. We had a customer who had a team in UK who were following Scrum, and at India Development Center, we were not following Scrum, but we were, synchronizing their milestones with in our project plan. Mm-hmm. So what was happening is that at the customer end, they were always saying, they were always not able to meet up their task at the end of every sprint, and keep on adding in the sprint backlog, next sprint backlog. And when we asked, they said, oh, we are agile, we don't measure, so it's okay if we add to the sprint backlog. So, and it was becoming really difficult for us to synchronize with them because we had our milestone which were dependent on their sprint completion. Mm-hmm. So this is one common problem I have seen that, like you said, that if you have measured something, then that should add some value. You should not measure. And that's the same answer they were giving, that we don't measure, because we are agile. So what should we do in these kind of cases, and how to tackle these cases where the team is not understanding the importance of completing the sprint, nor they are trying to replan the next sprints in maybe a longer manner or a better manner. They just tend to be, a bit casual because of the sprint methodology. Now,
do you mean that the customers or the consumers keep adding more things in, or the team is?
No, nothing was that. Since it was happening that they were not completing their task at the end of every sprint cycle.
Yeah, so I sat in a session with Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland about 3 or 4 years ago when they were at a Scrum gathering, and they asked the whole audience, hey, how many people out there are CSMs? 300 people raised their hands. And they said, how many are currently leading teams that are practicing and working inside sprints? Maybe 50 hands went down. And they said, how many of those teams are routinely delivering valuable software to a documented definition of done every sprint? Anybody want to guess how many hands stayed up? 3. So there's not a great track record out there of doing this and doing this well. And this was before they had rolled out the CSD program, which is the Certified Scrum Developer Program. They haven't done a good job of emphasizing the importance of the engineering task, of the engineering rigor that you also need in order to lower the cost of responding to technical change. And if you're not doing things like continuous integration, test first development, refactoring, simplest design, those things, build automation, automatic deployment, then your team is going to struggle. Another thing that I might ask is there a firm definition of done for the end of the sprint? Do you have a documented definition of what it means for everything to be completed? And is the team continually reminded that we have to get all of these things all the way to this definition of done? And that is very much a delivery-grained metric. That is not an activity-grained metric. You have a documented, objectively verifiable definition of done with points on it, like what environment must it run in, what type of testing must it be subjected to, what type of security audit must it survive, and continually remind the teams as they're estimating, as they're committing, as they're executing, that we've got this definition of done we have to meet. So I would first be suspicious maybe there's a weak definition of done, or maybe a lacking definition of done. And that the second one is that the team is not keeping that in mind as they're executing, and just because we're not measuring things doesn't mean that we can be all over the map, and they may or may not. And then I would look at the strength of the engineering practices. That may be a real barrier that they don't even know is there, that they don't realize what they're doing without, and because they haven't seen what it looks like necessarily to work in a continuously integrated, continuously deployed, automated tested environment. So I don't know your environment for sure, but I would guess maybe look in those couple directions, and you might find the answer. We've got a hand here. You're going to get the microphone to her. Yep, thank you.
This is not really related to the teams, but I still had a question relating to Agile. What's the shortest sprint that you've seen in your experience that is possible? I'm bringing this question out because in a couple of projects that I worked as a Scrum Master, we felt at that point of time that 2 weeks was a good sprint duration because we had a very good definition of done. There was a series of tests to be done, and to be able to achieve that, we felt from the India team that 2 weeks was a good enough, was the right time. But from the onshore, we had the pressure that try 3 days as a sprint duration,
wow,
which we felt was very short. And the project manager at the onshore said, I have worked across different organizations. I've done this for 10 years. It works. So I haven't seen an example where 3 days is feasible, but I was just trying to say that I think the example that was given to us was that Facebook does it. But since I'm not aware, so I just want to check with you. Do you think 3 days sprint is practical, and have you seen it work?
So I don't know, there's about 117 or 118 certified Scrum trainers out there, and I don't know all of them, but I know about 95 of them. And every one that I know is currently recommending a 2-week sprint length or shorter. That nobody's really recommending the by the book, 4-week, 30-day length anymore. Everybody's saying go straight for 2 weeks, at least that I know of. So that's really common. I've seen very small, kind of quick-moving web-based teams that are doing social networking apps and things like that get down to a weekly length where they do very quick planning, very quick reviews, and they are using CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous deployment, to get things all the way out to their production. And their definition of done actually includes this feature is deployed on production servers and customers are using it in those environments. I can name 3 or 4 organizations that are doing that, though. When you get down below that kind of a sprint boundary window, I think you're really not doing Scrum anymore either. When you get up to 6 weeks, that's not a sprint. That's a stroll on the beach. When you get down to 2 or 3 days, you're not really doing Scrum either. You're really more getting into a pure Kanban mode. And that's really what I recommend if you really want that kind of frequency and that kind of rapid turnaround, is you can give up a lot of the things that are in Scrum and start to look look at pure Kanban, or there's a hybrid between Kanban and Scrum called, cleverly enough, Scrumban. And there's one paper out there written by a guy named Corey Laddas, L-A-D-D-A-S, about the hybridization of Kanban and Scrum that might help you get down to the shorter and shorter lengths. And there are a few key differences, one of them being that you don't have a fixed schedule for your sprint reviews. You wait until a certain amount of features are done, and then you call a sprint review. So there's a lot of compromises in there like that that he recommends. It's an interesting paper. It's a free ebook you can download anyway. That might point you in towards a compromise that gets you to a shorter window. Personally, as I mentioned, I've mostly worked with big, very large enterprise adoptions, and they struggle to get down to 2 weeks. It's not even within their vision to imagine 3 days. So I haven't had a lot of personal experience with that. I only know a few companies that are doing it. In my mind, you're moving much closer to a pure Kanban system when you get that tight. Yeah. You might be close enough. Sure. So the question was, on an Agile project, can you share resources across project or across teams? So a couple things come to mind there. One of them is a chart that Mike Cohn sometimes draws that shows the number of tasks you're assigned to and the amount of time you spend on task. If you have 0 things to work on, you spend 0 time on task. If you have 1 thing to work on, you spend 50, maybe 60% of your time on task, because occasionally that thing becomes blocked, you're waiting for feedback, something happens. When you get up around 2.2, you get close to 80 or 90%. And then the line almost drops straight off. It almost completely flatlines, because you spend all of your time context switching and changing back and forth from what you're doing to what you're doing next. So I get often upset with resource managers that think 20 and 25% assignments, and I've seen 7% assignments into teams, that they think that's meaningful. 50%, okay, 25%, you're starting to lose me. When you get down to single digits, forget it. There's no such thing as a 7% assignment. But I will back away from that just a little bit by saying there's 2 classes of work that are routinely a team won't need all of, or they won't need 40 hours a week of a person, and that's usually around DBA, or database administration, and technical writing, or pubs. So very commonly, tech writing or pubs folks are more centralized, and they just drop into teams as needed. The one important thing to do there is track them as added capacity into the team. Don't just let them bump up the numbers and make it look like we had a better sprint when those drop in. But I like to see teams mostly with full-time assigned members. So for example, it's very easy. The path of least resistance is for me to go to Team A's daily scrum and say, well, I was really busy with Team B yesterday. I didn't get anything done for you. And you go to Team B, stand up, and you say, well, I was really, really busy with Team C yesterday. I didn't get anything done for you. And then so on and so forth, right? You see where I'm going. I don't want to cast bad aspersions on anyone, but that is the path of least resistance. And when no single group of people has visibility into your whole body of work, it makes it easy for you to do that. So you actually build much stronger teams when people are 100% assigned. If somebody's on 1 or 2 teams, that doesn't bother me that much. If they're on 3 or 4, then I start to get pretty nervous. I think I would do better, and I always argue for, I would rather have a team of 4 100% assigned people than 6 people that are half-time, because there's fewer communication channels, there's less overhead, and I think a 4-person dedicated team can outperform a team of a dozen half-timers, even though the FTE math doesn't look like they should. So yeah, you can do it to a degree. I think people could be on 1 or 2 teams at the risk of going to Team A and saying I was busy with Team B, and going to Team B and saying I was busy with Team A. But when you get into 3 or 4, I think you're probably across the line. Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm.
Is Agile the answer to that, or is it Kanban or
Yeah, so my position today is that a team that's doing mixed support and development work, like they're working on new features plus they're doing some support, what they typically do is they set aside a time bucket for all that support stuff coming in. They say, well, 35 or 40% or 20% of our time is set aside for operational issues. We don't know what they're going to be. We just know on average we spend about that much of our time doing it. Whenever that bucket gets bigger than 50%, I start to get itchy to go to pure Kanban. So I start to back away from Scrum at the point where the backlog is more than 50% operational on a sprint-to-sprint basis. Not because it doesn't work. I mean, it works fairly well, but there's not that much benefit out of setting aside a 70 or 80% unidentified bucket of time and trying to run that as a sprint. You really get just as much benefit out of an even lighter weight system, which is moving to pure Kanban. So I think if more than 50 or 60% of that team's workload is operational, I would consider going straight to Kanban. Are we doing okay on time? Can I take another question, or should I? Or are there any more?
I think we are running late by 5
Okay.
minutes.
Oh, sorry, guys. I have a tendency to go on. You can get verification from my poor wife of 24 years if you don't believe me from how long I've been up on stage. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all.